We come now to the second part, the basic idea, generally posed. My basic idea has a mildly Kantian flavor, but without its indigestible synthetic a priori. We can sum it up in a view that any idea of a world, a nature, a reality that we are able to have must be intrinsically open to induction. I see this as a conceptual truth, in the same way as, say, the truth of our view that any imaginary world must in principle be accessible to perceptual experience. Before explaining it in more detail, I should note that my view is so close to being self-evident that it would be strange if no one had thought of it earlier. As the citation at the start of this appendix proves, more technically, Kate Campbell followed a similar clue in developing a short argument to show the inevitability of applying inductive procedures in any world circumstances. As he noted, in order to experience a world cognitively as an objectively structured reality, we must continually apply empirical concepts which, in turn, if we are to postulate, learn from us from and use it and require a re-identification of the designata of their applications as identical. They can only be built if we are able to replicate them identically. However, this is only possible if there is a degree of uniformity in the world that is sufficient to allow these re-identifications, he says. Indeed, if the world were to lose all the regularities implicitly referred to, no concept would be replicable, and the experience of a world would be impossible. Coming back to my idea and understanding the concept of a world minimally as any set of empirical entities comparable with each other, this idea can be unpacked as follows. First, I consider it an indisputable truism that a world can only be experienced and said to exist if it is at least conceivable. However, we cannot conceive of any world without some degree of uniformity or regularity. Now, since we can only experience what we are able to conceive, it follows that we cannot experience any world completely devoid of regularity. This brings us to the point where it seems reasonable to think that the existence of regularity is all that is necessary for at least some inductive procedures to be applicable. However, if this is the case, then it is impossible for us to conceive any world of experience that is not open to induction. Consequently, it must be a conceptual truth that if a world is given to us, then some inductive procedure should be applicable to it. There is a predictable objection to this idea. Why should we assume that we cannot conceive the existence of a chaotic world, a world devoid of regularities and therefore closed to induction? In my view, the widespread belief that this possibility has been exists, but it has been a deplorable mistake, and I'm afraid that David Hume was chiefly responsible for this. His error was to choose causal regularity as the focus of his discussion, strengthening it with carefully selected examples like those of trees blooming in winter and snow burning like fire. This was misleading, and in what follows I intend to explain why. Causal regularity is what I could call a form of diachronic regularity. That is, one in which a given kind of phenomenon is regularly followed by another kind. We expect the becoming, werden, of our world to include regular successions. However, induction applies not only to diachronic regularities, but also to something that Hume, with his fixation on causality, did not consider, namely synchronic regularities. Synchronic regularities are what we could call also structures, states of affairs that endure over time in the constitution of anything we can imagine. The world has not only a becoming, a werden, but also a remaining, a bleiben, which its multiple patterns of permanence, and this remaining must also be inductively graspable. What can make this last view clear is by conceiving a world without diachronic regularity, also excluding causal regularities. This world would be devoid of change, static, frozen. It still seems that we could properly call it a world, since even a frozen world would have regularities to be conceivable. It must have the structure filled with synchronic regularities. However, insofar as this frozen world is constituted by synchronic regularities, it must be open to induction. We could foresee that its structural regularities would endure for some time, allowing us to apply concepts. The period of its existence, and this already allows us a very strong degree of inductive reasoning. Considerations like these expose the real weakness of Hume's argument. By concentrating on diachronic patterns and thinking of them as if they were the only regularities that could be inductively treated, it becomes much easier to suppose the possibility of existence of a world to which induction does not apply or cannot be applicable, a world that nevertheless continues to exist. Well, one could insist on thinking that at least a world that is chaotic, but not entirely chaotic, could exist with a minimum of structure or uniformity, so that it would exist but be insufficient for the application of inductive procedures. However, this is a theoretical impossibility, for induction has a self-adjusting nature. That is, its principles are such that they are always conceivably able to be calibrated to match any degree of uniformity that is given in its field of application. The requirement of an inductive basis of repeated and varied inductive attempts can always be further extended, the greater the improbability of the expected uniformity. Consequently, even a system with a minimum of uniformity requiring a maximum of inductive searching would always end up enabling successful induction. Well, the third point is reformulating PF. We need it. PF is not adequate. To show how I would use the just of third proposal to reformulate the principles of uniformity or induction, I will reconsider in some detail PF, but this is in the next video.